Welcome to the Archangels Feast podcast. As many of my current listeners know, growing up I was homeschooled in Connecticut, and my family networked with other homeschooling families. As such, I've gotten to know many homeschooling moms, and I know that there's two things that homeschooling moms hate the most: complaining and video games. Now, the reason I say this is because I'd like to start off by explaining a video game theory, and now everyone knows that the homeschooling moms aren't allowed to complain about it. The video game is called Super Smash Bros. Melee, and the theory is called 20XX. Super Smash Bros. Melee is a fighting game where you start by selecting from a list of characters, and then you select from a list of stages to fight on. The goal of the game is to knock your opponent so far off the stage that they leave the screen entirely and lose a stock. This process is repeated until someone runs out of stocks. Now, although Melee was intended as a party game, it was soon discovered to be extremely fast-paced, precise, and even mentally engaging when played at a high level. As such, the competitive Melee scene grew, and Melee even rose to become one of the most popular games at EVO, the world's biggest fighting game tournament, and it was the top most popular game for several years running. Now let's talk about the theory, 20XX. If you look at a list of the top 100 Melee players at any of its given competitive years, the most common character selection is Fox McCloud. Now, this character is very difficult to master, but once he's mastered, he's regarded as having the best movement and attacking options out of any character for most situations. So the theory, called 20XX, is that sometime this century, an entire flowchart of every situation in the game will be solved, and then it will be proved that Fox is in fact the best character for most situations, and therefore everyone at the top level playing for money is going to pick Fox and just practice relentlessly to play him perfectly, and flawlessly execute that theoretical decision flowchart. The reason I bring up 20XX isn't just because I grew up playing Melee, it's also because I grew up in a church that lost a culture war. And there's a funny thing about a religion that loses a culture. If you lost, well, then you have to start doing something different to start winning again. But this proves difficult in a religious culture that has a strong sense of tradition and sticking to its principles. So any Catholic who comes along and starts thinking in new terms is just going to be met with a wall of asterisks and wariness. After all, if the Catholic Church could win hearts and minds by just reciting Aquinas' arguments and reciting the Council's rebuttal to every possible heresy more perfectly, well, in a sense, that would be easier than adapting to a new set of circumstances. But we're seeing that the Church is like Super Smash Bros. If the major players just keep trying to optimize an existing set of strategies and tactics, it has this effect of sucking the humanity out of the game, and people will just start leaving the scene. But on the other hand, the church can't really change at a certain level, or it wouldn't be itself anymore. And so there's this natural tension that exists between those who see the need to adapt to new circumstances and those who see change as an abandonment of tradition. This conundrum raises questions and discussions that are deep, interesting, and as dynamic as Super Smash Bros. Sorry, Mom. For this podcast, I had the pleasure of hashing this out with Peter Wolfgang. Mr. Wolfgang is the executive director of the Family Institute of Connecticut, whose explicit goal is to see citizens, institutions, and government acknowledge and encourage the vital role of the family, and to once again see the Judeo-Christian principles that are articulated in the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution re-employed in our society and its public policy. That's taken from their website, and I'll leave a link to their website in the podcast description. As its executive director, Mr. Wolfgang has been steeped in Catholic politics for years, and I couldn't have found a better guest to think these things through with. I felt like our conversation could have gone on for hours, but as I indicated towards the end of the podcast, I feel like we sailed across an ocean in this conversation. At any point, we could have set an anchor and done a deep dive for hours, but I think being able to provide this sort of lay of the land in the time frame that we did have, it really helped me to think about these themes with a little more clarity and start asking sharper questions than I was before and even during the podcast. Before we jump into it, I also want to note that I'm starting to have conversations which may be of interest to a wider audience, so I'm expanding the podcast to some different platforms. I'll be setting up a Twitter and making sure to get these podcasts onto Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well, since I know different people prefer to get notified and listen via different platforms. So I'll also start cross-linking to the different platforms so that everything will be easy to find. Anyways, that's all I got. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Where are we? There we are. All right. Now we're recording. Hey,
We're
so
on.
I'm with Peter Wolfgang. Thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
So I really wanted to have a conversation really about kind of the current moment we're in, kind of from the perspective of from Catholics, and then maybe channel some concerns that other 20 somethings like me might have. Um, so maybe to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship with politics and Family Institute of Connecticut?
Sure, I can go on and on. So just
Yeah,
stop me when I've gone on too long.
sure.
I'm working on about. I should warn the listeners, the viewers, whomever. Working on about 5 hours of sleep right now. I've been up every night watching the Republican National Convention, way past my bedtime. I'm an old guy. But if anything, maybe that'll loosen up my tongue and I'll say crazy stuff I wouldn't normally say, and it'll be an even more interesting podcast, Stephen. Who
Love
knows?
it, love it.
So you asked about me in my background in politics and so forth.
Mhm.
My name is Peter Wolfgang. I am the executive director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. I've been running FIC, its acronym, for about, not the acronym, but the organization itself for about 13 years now. I am a 50-year-old lifelong resident of the state of Connecticut. Except for college, I've lived in Connecticut pretty much my whole life. And as to my own past, my own political involvement, I've always been kind of politically interested, oriented, whatever you want to call it. I grew up in Manchester, outside of Hartford. My dad's Jewish, my mom's Catholic, and we were raised. My brothers and I were raised to be sort of Christmas and Easter Catholics, and the faith didn't really become a serious part of my life until my 20s. And so, we went to CCD catechism throughout the years, made the sacraments, but hardly ever went to mass on Sunday. My 1 year of Catholic school was 7th grade at St. Bridget Junior High School in the early 80s. Other than that, my entire life growing up, it was always public school. I'm really a public school kid. And, in my family and here in the New England region growing up, I had pretty much the same politics, the same worldview as everyone around me, which is to say liberal, what it still is today, left of center. If anything, I was almost kind of a red diaper baby. There's a phrase for people like me or people that are more into it than me. My great uncle on my father's side was practically a card-carrying Trotskyite in New York in the 1930s. We can back up and explain to your listeners what that is, but it's sort of an offshoot of communism, far left. My great uncle, he spent a lot of time in New York in the 1930s running with radical crowds. He was an old man by the time that I knew him, but he passed some of that radicalism definitely down into the bloodstream, into our family. My dad is like most Jews in the USA. He's secular. He's not a big fan of religion in general, including his own. But he was kind of indifferent. He signed off on us being raised Catholic or sort of nominally Catholic, which is what my mom was. My grandparents were New Deal Democrats, my mom's parents. So, there really was, I'm actually the first Republican in the entire history of my family, a great disappointment. I'm the black sheep of the family. It was really, you hear people tell their coming out stories about how when they first told their family they were gay or whatever. Nothing compared to telling your Democrat family you're a Republican. Believe me.
Sounds at least like in fun Thanksgivings for you.
Yeah. Oh, to this very day. I could tell we could do a whole podcast episode on that. But what happened was when I was in high school, I graduated in 88, had hair down to my shoulders when I could still grow hair, and a beard. And with my peacenik friends, we used to protest Mr. Reagan's arms race every Saturday at the town's Vietnam War Memorial. And so that was me in high school. In college at American University, I was president of the College Democrats. In late '91, I hosted a party for Bill and Hillary Clinton when he was first running for president. I was like 21 years old. And it sort of continued into the mid 90s. I came back to Connecticut and went to UConn Law School. So what happened? How did I become the guy I am now? Well, I was always very liberal in my youth. The one place where I disagreed with all my liberal friends, Stephen, was the abortion issue. I was a pro-life liberal. I was a liberal across the board, except on that one issue. And to me,
that's a red diaper, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
It seemed like I always felt like something was wrong there that my liberal friends didn't understand. Those of us who are liberal, we're the compassionate ones. We're the ones who care about the underdog and the vulnerable. We should be the pro-lifers, and the other guys should be pro-abortion. And I felt like it was just some sort of intellectual error. And if I could just persuade my liberal friends of that, they'd come to understand. And then what happened in the mid-90s was Gingrich and the Republicans took over Congress for the first time in 40 years. And the partial birth abortion bill started to move through Congress. This is one particularly gruesome abortion procedure. I won't describe it unless you think your listeners can handle it. It was eventually outlawed. It took many years. But this was a rare occasion where the conversation changed to just the mother and, her choice and what she's going through, as important as that is, to the child and what the child is experiencing in an abortion. And it's really the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York, he was a U.S. Senator back then, pro-choice, pro-abortion, always voted against us, voted with us on banning partial birth abortion because, in his words, it's too close to infanticide. And I mean, that was kind of an aha moment for me, where I realized when I saw that my liberal friends supported even partial birth abortion, which is a form of infanticide, really, that there's something more than an intellectual error here. There's something willful. And that it really kind of peeled me off of the left in general. And I started reading deeply into conservative political philosophy, into conservative theology or orthodox theology, whatever you want to call it. Back then in the early 90s, at my hometown parish in Manchester, we were all under the influence of one of the most liberal priests in the Archdiocese of Hartford. And the parish used to organize trips to like call to action conferences out in the Midwest. This is the group of liberal Catholic dissenters. I was one of those guys for a while in the early 90s. I was reading National Catholic Reporter, America Magazine, Commonweal Magazine. I was of that crowd. And it was really the partial birth abortion issue more than anything that peeled me off of both the theological and the political left and started to move me towards the right in the mid 90s. And big influence was reading Father Newhouse in First Things magazine, which is still around today. Father Newhouse died about 10, 11 years ago. But there was this incredibly erudite, witty priest that founded a magazine called First Things. And the last 20 pages of every issue, it was like a blog before there were blogs. The last 20 pages was just him going off on everything in the world. And he was so brilliant. There are other people my age or really older than me who will talk about the influence of William F. Buckley and National Review and how that played a role in them becoming a conservative. For me, it was really First Things magazine and Father Newhouse. I was always a specific kind of conservative. My conservatism was always deeply rooted in my Catholicism. I was very specifically a Catholic conservative. And so that, in a nutshell, that's what sort of put me on the course I was on, and eventually, graduated law school, took the bar, passed the bar exam, met my predecessor at this organization, and eventually became executive director of Family Institute of Connecticut.
Oh, wow, cool. So actually, as you were talking there, I think I kind of realized you're a better guest for this podcast than I even hoped, because I was hoping you could kind of speak to some of the things that I think people like me are experiencing. And just as an example, so I grew up Catholic, and I got really into it in high school and through college, and I found myself, I went to a secular technical school where I got my science degree. And so, I think there's a lot of Catholics like me who, are college educated, but are kind of surrounded by, secular smart people, like them who have college degrees. And something I kind of noticed was, I think a lot of the arguments and the things that I inherited, like the reasons for specific policies, for example, the ones that I inherited and internalized in high school didn't really fly very well when I got to college. And so when I say you're even better guest than I thought, which, I think you have a lot of experience with these kinds of conversations. Um, so like just to give an example here, of something that maybe you could talk to that I personally, found difficult. So when I was in college, for example, or if I'm at work and I'm having a conversation about abortion, which it sounds like your red diaper issue there. Um, I think there's very simple arguments on both sides that are very kind of airtight and they're hard to get around. And so, people who want to try and have conversations with people on the other side and people, like a lot of the people I know who are like me, except on the other side of the spectrum, they want to have conversations. They're like me, they got a college degree, they're smart and generally want to talk. Um, but for example, I think a lot of the core idea that I inherited was, it's a baby, so don't kill it. And everyone has a right to life. And if you take away a right to life at any point, then who knows, like what the avalanche, a slippery slope, they can take away. Who knows what the government can take away after that. And that was kind of how I internalized it. I don't think that's the most sophisticated way to present it, but I'm saying when I was in high school, that's kind of what I inherited. And, if I tried to present that in college, it just wouldn't fly. And I think part of the reason was, the immediate pushback was, well, that's not how rights work. Again, we were just science degrees. We weren't legal scholars, but if you look at, you can get a gun at 18, a license at 16, and then you can't get alcohol till 21. It doesn't seem like rights are a principled thing. It seems like they're a pragmatic thing. And that might be the first reaction I would get if I tried to say that we have a right to life that derives all these other rights. It sounds nice and principled, but if people don't think that rights are principled things, I have to have some theory of what rights are to respond to that. And so very quickly we get into waters that are just deeper than I was prepared to tread. And I think that's just an example of, I think hearing a lot of very simplified versions on the Catholic side of, why should we support certain policies? And we hear very simple things and then try it out in the wild and it doesn't fly very well. Is that something you can relate to, or is that
very much so? Very much so.
Is that something you see as well? Do you see this in other young people or in other Christians or Catholics who give simplified or maybe too simple? Is this something you see that we struggle with?
Have I seen it? I've lived it. Yeah. I'll get into that. It's not just the young. It's everyone. How old are you, Stephen?
24.
24.
Yeah.
So it's every faithful Catholic in this country, from a 24-year-old podcaster to a 60-something-year-old Princeton professor of philosophy. The entire body of the Catholic faithful in the United States of America in the 21st century is struggling with exactly what you described. It's not just you. It's not just being young. It's the particular difficulty that the church finds itself in this particular moment in time, this time and place. And we can unpack that a little. I'll tell you, first of all, there's some principles that you want to apply. You probably know this, but it deserves to be stated. When you're talking about what you just described, when you're talking to your friends, and in fact, I know you know this because I watched a little of your podcast with your cousin, so you know how to do this. You already know how to do this, but let's state some principles for anyone that might be listening to this podcast. When you were describing it, you were talking specifically about principles of logic and deep waters, and I wasn't prepared for this, that. Everything, when we're dealing with human beings are not purely rational creatures. There's a whole lot that goes up into making who we are making up who we are as human beings. So the first principle, I would encourage you to, I don't know if you've ever heard of Leah Labresco Sargent. She just I sat in on about 20 minutes of a Zoom talk that she just gave to the Hartford chapter of Legatus, which are these Catholic CEOs. I mean, you would know some of the older folks in this group, and she was fantastic. She really she's lived a similar situation to you. She's closer in age to you than I am, and she can speak to this too from firsthand experience. But I think rule number one is that everything begins with friendship. The first thing you want to do when you're engaging people, and you can't always do this, I know, sometimes it's just casual acquaintances, classmates, and so forth. But in general, what you want to do, and you don't want to do this just as an end in itself, you want to do it out of love for the other person. You want to get to know the other person for his or her own sake, right? That's what our faith teaches us. You want to have that love for all of humanity. But hopefully as a byproduct of that, everything begins with friendship. You want to get to know people. You want to have this rapport with someone. You want to have this trust so that they'll even be open to hearing what you have to say about, when you try to reason with them and make logical arguments for our point of view and for what we see as the fallacies in their point of view. Because one thing too is that even if you do, and I'll get into this in terms of how I think I've lived it, even if you have rock solid arguments, you can win the argument but lose the person. And what you want to do is you want to win the person. This is true of Catholic apologetics. It's true of the culture war, political issues that we're talking about now. It's true of just about anything. So you want to make sure that you have the right disposition. I would say everything begins in prayer. You want to make sure that you have a good spiritual director. You want to make sure that you immerse yourself in prayer. You want to have really kind of a regimen of some kind of like daily prayer, the rosary, scripture reading, mental prayer, Eucharistic adoration, the Mass. You don't want to overdo it. We're lay people. Our calling in this world is to be lay people. We're not called to be monks or priests, but holiness is for the laity too. And you want some sort of plan of life that's specific to a layman that can sort of prepare you for this. Because anything you do accomplish isn't really going to be you, it's going to be him, it's going to be God. So you want to kind of prepare the ground and do so. I hope you don't hear that. That's my phone going off.
No worries.
You want to do that. Excuse me one sec.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, it's this one. You want to do that in a spirit of humility. We want to be sure to do an examination of conscience, check our pride, all that. All of that is preliminary. That's number one. Number two is you want to do your homework. You want to get the arguments down. You want to read up. You don't want to just shoot from the hip. You don't want to just sort of absorb by osmosis or whatever your own upbringing and kind of just boil it down and get it, tell the person, well, I think such and such, this is what I was taught growing up. You want to read up, especially in the age of the internet. There's so much. You heard me reference a Princeton professor. I was talking about Robbie George at Princeton. I referenced First Things magazine. There's so much good stuff out there. There's a lot of bad stuff too, and you want to be discerning. I also listened to a few minutes of one of your podcasts about things going on in the Catholic world. There was the Catholic bubble and then the Catholic drama bubble inside the larger Catholic bubble. That's all true. And you want to be a little bit discerning about what's worth my time and what's not worth my time. But I would say the number two principle is that you do want to get educated on all of this.
Yeah, I think I spend a lot of calories thinking about cleaning our own house. And I think this kind of teases that out a little bit, because when I reacted and said, well, if I feel like I don't have my arguments together, like for example, if I present an argument, about, I don't know, gay marriage, like I was in college when gay marriage was legalized, and I didn't really have really coherent philosophical political thoughts on it. I just kind of balked at it, and I would, I just wouldn't jump on the bandwagon, and I would talk about it with friends and they would like, why not? I didn't really have great reasons. And it seems like, to them, how is it coming off? Well, you're just doing this for religious reasons. You don't actually have a good philosophical or political reason. And aren't you supposed to keep your religion out of politics? And I think that becomes a stumbling block that, my secular friends would have, where if you don't have your arguments together, but you're presenting reasons which aren't your faith, but you don't have all those reasons in a row, it just comes off as you don't really know what you're talking about. You really believe this for religious reasons. You don't actually have good reasons, reasonable reasons. You have your religious reasons for believing this, and I think people get hung up on that. If you know maybe you have the one Ben Shapiro who has everything, who has an entire flowchart of the universe ready to go, but most people don't. And I worry about cleaning our own house, because I wonder to what extent are we shooting ourselves in the foot just by the way we present ourselves. And so, I do spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think that's why I did make a video about, the drama of a bubble within a bubble, because, there is, on the one hand, like you said, we have to have a posture of I care about you. And if I'm talking to someone, like, that has to be your posture. It's humility and care. And, it's like we're all on the same island together. So we got to figure out how to get along together. And you have to have that posture. And you also have to have arguments, and I think you nailed it. I worry that people people don't strike the balance very well. And I don't like who's the role model for striking that balance, or how.
Oh, I would strongly, I referenced him a couple times. I would definitely say check out Robbie George at Princeton University. He's probably Robert P. George, probably the leading Catholic public intellectual in the United States right now. He's on our national board of advisors here at the Family Institute. I'm friends with him on Facebook. I have a passing acquaintance with him. He is one heck of a good example of how to do this, and he knows how not to do it. And learning from him how not to do it is almost just as important. So I would say that there's a couple things I would say. One is that everything you and I have already just said. Here's something I want to prepare you for, though. Even if you do everything we just said with step one and step two, step one, you're in the right frame of mind. You approach the person correctly, spiritually, all of that, out of empathy. Step two, you've done your homework. You've got airtight arguments. Be open to the possibility that even when you've done everything right, it could still go bad. And this comes back to my original point about people are not always rational. You referenced same-sex marriage. Oh, I lived through that. When I talked about, I lived through it, that's the one I'm talking about. Here in Connecticut, I was one of two, but I was one of the key leaders for the fight against same-sex marriage in the first decade of this new century, in the 2000s, all through my 30s. I mean, I was on the front page of the newspapers. That's the thing where Family Institute of Connecticut really went way above the radar and became a known force in Connecticut. Up till now, we've talked about the life issue mostly, but the other big issue is same-sex marriage. And it wasn't just me. I like to say if this is a culture war, I'm not one of the generals. Living here in Connecticut, I'm like a lieutenant leading a platoon of special forces behind enemy lines. We're behind enemy lines here in the state of Connecticut. Robbie George, who I just mentioned, he's one of the generals. Maggie Gallagher was one of the generals. She was another public intellectual. She was a nationally syndicated columnist. She and Robbie George together, and my predecessor here at Family Institute, they formed an organization called National Organization for Marriage. There were all these entities of our gatherings of our best and our brightest throughout the 2000s. We had the conservative Catholic movement in the United States had a real head of steam going into the year 2000. Pope St. John Paul II had been Pope for about 20 years as we headed into the year 2000. There was a real sense that under him, the Catholic Church was slowly gaining back the role in society that it had played before the 60s, before the sexual revolution, when things fell apart, that under John Paul II, between his example, Mother Teresa's example, that the church's prestige and street cred was growing, and somehow all the ground that had been lost in society since the 1960s, we were going to take it all back. There was going to be a new evangelization, a new springtime. When I was your age, when I was 24, it was 1994, and as we were headed into the new millennium, we had this head of steam. We had won the Cold War peacefully. Pope John Paul II had been a part of that, and now we were going to win the culture war here at home. And we had guys like Richard John Newhouse, Michael Novak, George Weigel. These names may not be familiar to a younger set. I saw the ones that are familiar. We can get into that later. But these were the guys who were the best and the brightest, and they were going to guide us. They were John Paul II's interpreters here in the USA, and they guided us on what to say and not say on same-sex marriage, what to do and not do. And so we entered the 21st century. This fight came to us. We didn't go looking for it, but we thought we had the tools for it. And, as I sit here with you now, 20 years later, we got our heads handed to us. We had all the arguments. We had the right attitude. Our arguments were better, frankly. And the shocking thing was it just didn't matter. Robbie George he's one of the leaders of what's called natural law. I think he comes from a school of thought that's sometimes called new natural law. He's one of the leading proponents of this. He wrote a book with two brilliant students of his, one of whom used to live in Connecticut here, whom I knew, Sharif Gergis and Ryan Anderson and Robbie together. The three of them wrote a book called What is Marriage? And the arguments in that book were airtight. I mean, if this was really a fight just based on logic, reason, arguments, it would be game over. But you saw well, maybe you didn't see what happened because you were too young at the time. But what happened was we had referenda, like we put it on the ballot. We had referendums in almost all of the 50 states in the 2000s, even in the most liberal, most deep blue states. You would never guess this now in 2020, but around 2004, 2006, I mean, everywhere, 2008, California, everywhere this was put on the ballot, almost everywhere, except for like one or two states finally around 2011 or so. Everywhere this was put on the ballot, traditional marriage always won. And we won the argument. So what the other guys did instead was we were outgunned. They controlled the legal academy and they controlled the courts, and they got the courts to just impose it on us anyway. I mean, this was something that really called into question the entire idea of the American experiment, whether we're still a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, because the people voted to keep the traditional definition of marriage, and our elites, our betters said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Your robed masters, your philosopher kings on the courts, we're just going to impose it on you anyway. And it was stuff like this that eventually elected Donald Trump. People eventually just got fed up and really, frankly, in some ways kind of lost faith in the American system of government. That's what made a guy like Trump even possible. A lot of people were just like, that's it, I just don't care anymore. Just give me a guy who's going to protect me, protect religious liberty, and the heck with society overall. And you'll see this now with people your age, like the people I talked about, Father Newhouse, the people that influenced me when I was your age. Their thing was all about the compatibility of Catholicism with the American Republic. And then we lost same-sex marriage. And then, some of those court rulings actually sort of describe people like you and me as enemies of humanity. That's what Justice Scalia said in one of the dissents. Like what you, the court, have just said that anyone who has traditional moral views on marriage, you've just declared them an enemy of humanity. And I think that had an effect on a certain subset of younger Catholics, where if you follow them on the internet, here in Connecticut, people you and I know personally, they've kind of given up on the American Republic altogether. You hear improbable fantasies about monarchy and, medieval France, and we need something like that. Frankly, stuff that's just never going to happen. But I have to say, I get it. I can understand why they feel the way they did, because everything you and I just discussed about step one and step two, it's not just a a guy like you in college, like people at very high levels did everything right, and the left controlled this country, and for them it was more just it was just power politics. They just forced through what they wanted anyway. And so here we are, of course, for every action there is a reaction, and they didn't know that what they were doing was paving the way for Trump, but that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I could totally relate to the end product of now we're in a time where I've heard people or I've heard opinions get called bigoted, and it's like I know people who are to the religious conservative right of that opinion, and I know they're not bigots. So I like I get that. Um, I'm really curious actually about how you're thinking about the culture we're at a higher level. Because I think you have a better perspective on the sort of ebb and flow of how is Catholicism situated in America. And like you said, like I had no idea it was on an upswing before 2000. Like this is the first I've heard of that. I think I just kind of came of age, in a time when, they legalized gay marriage, and then 3 years later we have 72 genders. And it's like we just lost the culture war, and that's all I know. And I think I'm also kind of getting the like the sort of college educated slice of the pie here. And so I
Yeah.
think I might be thinking about this from a very different perspective, which is just a more limited one. But I want to hear what you think about the sort of culture war at the highest level, and maybe you could react to how I'm thinking about it, and maybe that would be an interesting way to sort of end the philosophy segment here. But I do want to end up with some other questions, so I'll leave some time for that. But the way
Well,
I tend to, yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Finish your
So
thought.
I guess the way I tend to think about the secularization of our culture is it's a rejection of there's a rejection of belief in God, where it's people don't have a strong opinion on the existence of God anymore. And then it's not only that, but it's a rejection of many aspects of the lifestyle and all the benefits that come along with it. And the way I think about it in my head is it's like they've rejected Aquinas and Chesterton, where they've rejected, any argument for the existence of God is cast into doubt. And there's maybe Aquinas is the poster boy of we've rejected Aquinas. But then it's just, I think about G.K. Chesterton's orthodoxy, and it's just, here's how my Catholicism influences my relationships, and here's how it influences my politics, and here's how it influences my sense of purpose, and everything's going well, right? And I think we've lost Aquinas and Chesterton at the same time. And my fear is that we're not getting Chesterton back. So one of my fears, for example, is like, Jordan Peterson just gave a lecture series on the biblical psychology of yeah, or what was it, the psychological significance of biblical stories, and he got tens of millions of views on that. And it's like he's not a Catholic, he's not a practicing Christian. Like why is the poster boy of religion not even religious? And so that's what I mean when I say I don't think we're getting Chesterton back, which is I think we need to up our game, and it's like what can our faith bring to bear on the problems in the world? And I think we tend to focus more on the Aquinas aspect of let me prove that this is the right thing to do. Like let me there's definitely an intellectual movement within the church. Like I see that there's a lot of intellectuals in the church who are trying to prove the existence of God, and trying to prove that this policy is in line with common sense shared philosophy principles. Like I don't think there's a shortage of that. I think there is a shortage of Catholics who are trying to bring like who are taking a utilitarian approach, and trying to say like, look, all these concerns about gender, like we have answers to these. Like all these concerns you guys have about purpose in life, we have answers to these. And I think I just don't see as much of that. Like I don't see as many Catholics on the public scene speaking to those concerns. And so that's my worry, that we're focusing on getting Aquinas back, and we're missing Chesterton. And that's how I've been framing it in my head. If we lost the culture war, and we're not trying to win the culture back, we're trying to win Aquinas back. And I that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, again, from my slice of the pie, where I'm coming at it from. I see other people who are like me, who are mostly college educated, and how they're thinking about things and talking to them. That's the slice I see. Like I don't necessarily see the ebb and flow of the culture war, and we were winning, and then we lost, and then everyone voted for traditional marriage, and then the elites, said no. Like I don't necessarily have a better view of all that. And so I'm kind of wondering, how do you situate our current moment as like, where does the Catholic Church stand in America, and where does the culture we're going? Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that one's vantage point cannot help be affected by how old we are, what we experienced, what we didn't experience, and the interplay between generations has always fascinated me.
Yeah.
I love that I'm an old guy now. I love that I'm 50 years old and that there's an entire generation of adults now that have come up after me, and I can kind of, talking to guys like you, I can kind of get a sense of where things are. I think I need conversations like this. I appreciate everything that you just said. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack. I want to say something about the end and then switch to the beginning, go to the middle. I don't know. We'll see where this goes. At the end, you referenced Jordan Peterson, and you're like, well, how come Peterson can get millions of views for talking about the psychology of the Bible, and meanwhile, the church, where is the church? We're not hearing anything. You talked about Chesterton and Aquinas, or at least it's not being received by society, I think, is what you're trying to say, the way a guy like Jordan Peterson is. Very, very important point. You talked about Chesterton and Aquinas, that there were too much Aquinas, not enough Chesterton. My concern there, I think you're onto something. I've been concerned that eventually, with this trying to get Aquinas back and so forth, that eventually we're going to be a church of eggheads. Like the eggheads will be the only ones left. I wrote an article a couple of years ago called How the Church Lost the White Working Class. And I think that's my big concern. That's one of my big concerns is, it's great that, oh, look, here's yet another book that's come out about all the recent intellectuals who converted to Catholicism. And there's this professor at Harvard who just converted to Catholicism. And isn't that wonderful? Well, it is wonderful, but not if they're the only ones that are left. And I'm concerned too that we've got this sort of egghead church that really can't meet the average guy on the street, the average guy in the pew, even, the plumber or whatever. Well, the average guy isn't going to be in the pew anymore. It's just going to be a bunch of Ivy League professors, and that's not really what we're aiming for here. I don't think that's what Christ told us. Go forth and make disciples of all the colleges. I mean, it was all the nations, right? So I have a lot of sympathy for what you're saying. Let's come back. We'll come back to the Jordan Peterson thing in a moment. Circle around back to the end. To the beginning of what you were saying, where you were like, well, I never heard that about Catholicism was gaining in the late 90s, and then something went wrong and so forth. And where is Catholicism today? Catholicism in 2020 in this country is flat on its back. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know.
Okay.
We can unpack that a little. We can fill in the blanks. We can talk about why that is.
Yeah.
I should qualify. When I talk about Catholicism was on its way back up in the late 90s, there's a sense in which that's true, and there's a sense in which it's not. In fact, looking at it from the perspective of 2020, and there's been a lot of ink spilled along this lines, is that those of us in the late 90s who were reading Father Newhouse and George Weigel and so forth, these prophets, frankly, of optimism and hope, and just wait, the 21st century is going to belong to us, that we ourselves were in a bubble, and that we believe something that now, from the perspective of 2020, turned out to be completely false. The future, or at least the near future, didn't belong to us. We had no idea, or the people, the Pied Pipers we were following, actually had no idea what they were talking about. I don't want to, that's too harsh. I mean, these are great people who I'm actually inspired by, whose works I still follow today. So I want to qualify it. The way I'm describing this is probably a little too harsh. At the same time, I think there's no denying the fact that they had a vision of the near future that had the church sort of marching forward in triumph and gaining new ground. And what actually happened could not have been more the reverse of that. That the left turned out to be far stronger than we realized. The church turned out to be far weaker. There's been actually books and articles written about this. Actually, really only one book-length take on this. A guy named Joseph Bottom, who actually was Father Newhouse's right-hand man at First Things, he wrote a book called An Anxious Age. And the first half of the book, he's describing kind of the world you're struggling with. He calls them the post-Protestants, the sort of people you're going to school with now. And the second half of the book is a whole book-length meditation on what he calls John Paul II, JP2 Catholicism, and how it wasn't as strong as we thought. It didn't put down as deep intellectual roots as we thought. And that's kind of why we got our heads handed to us in the 21st century. He talks about it being an overly intellectualized Catholicism. And I think he's right about that. I think you sense it now, growing up amidst the wreckage of the defeats that my generation suffered when we tried to fight this stuff. Joseph Bottom's book, An Anxious Age, is important here. Ross Douthat, who's actually a Connecticut guy. Ross Douthat. Oh yeah. He's a little younger than me, maybe 5 years younger or so. But Ross Douthat, who's a columnist for the New York Times, in an Orthodox,
showing up on podcasts that people like me listen to.
Douthat is an absolute for your generation. Douthat, I think, should be to you guys what Father Newhouse was to me, except you will have the benefit of a guy who's primarily a journalist. He's really just describing, if you're lost in the mall and you look at a map and the first thing you look at is the big arrow that says you are here. That's the value of Ross Douthat. Douthat's just describing, look, this is where we are right now, folks, for better or worse. And he talks about how what he calls the John Paul II synthesis, that John Paul II, he goes deep into theology, that John Paul II and Pope Benedict, what they were trying to do was weave this hermeneutic of continuity between pre-Vatican II Catholicism, post-Vatican II Catholicism, how it all holds together. There's been no rupture. Douthat sees a crisis within the church itself. He gave a very important speech a few years ago called The Crisis of Conservative Catholicism, where he laid all this out, similar to Joseph Bottom, that John Paul II Catholicism, the stuff I believed was going to be the wave of the future when I was your age, that it turned out not to be as strong as expected, that we suffered tremendous defeats, which is why you're now growing up in the world that you're growing up in. And he lays out why that is and what some possible paths for the future might be. One is, a lot of this has to do with stuff inside the church. After Vatican II, and I'm oversimplifying here, but you could argue that there were sort of three separate streams of Catholics after Vatican II. There were traditionalists, there were conservatives, and there were liberals. The liberals said Vatican II was a rupture with previous church teaching, and it's a good thing. The traditionalists said Vatican II was a rupture with previous church teaching, and it's a bad thing. And the conservatives said Vatican II was not a rupture with church teaching. There's a continuity there all along. And that, the conservatives, the guys in the middle, that would be John Paul II, that would be Pope Benedict XVI, and guys like me who were reading First Things and kind of absorbing all that when I was about your age or maybe just a bit older than you are right now. Douthat says, and there was particular antagonism between the conservatives and the traditionalists. Douthat's argument is the conservatives were toast, basically. It didn't work out. Either the traditionalists or the liberals, you're going to have to give them a second look because something isn't working there with John Paul and Benedict's vision for Catholicism, that the church is in huge crisis. We had the first wave of revelation about clergy sex abuse scandals in 2002. We've now had an even more horrible wave of sex abuse revelations in 2018 with all the information that came out about Theodore McCarrick and all that, and the scandal of everyone knew that that there's a culture of corruption inside the church that goes deeper than we realized. This is all stuff that's now being hashed out. Like, what does this mean? How does this overlap with the culture war, with the church's much weakened position than where we thought we would be in the culture war 30 years ago? Douthat is a key guy for untangling this. But one thing he says is, we've got to take a second look at the traditionalists and consider that maybe they had a point. That the guys who said that Vatican II may not have been so good for the church. And at this point, I mean, we're about 50 years out from Vatican II, and I think you don't have to go whole hog traditionalist. You don't have to buy the full claim that that Vatican II was in discontinuity with the church. I think you can believe in Vatican II completely, as I do, and still recognize that the last 50 years have been really bad for the church. Things have not gone well. It's not just the last 20 years, the last 50 years. And John Paul II, to me, is one of the greatest popes in history. And even but the man was human. He wasn't born on Krypton. He had to die eventually.
Oh,
he couldn't do
really? No, he was born in Poland. I know that one.
Well, I'll tell you,
Krypton, right?
If you read George Weigel, you'd think that he thinks John Paul II did have a cape and a big S on his chest. But I think we have to face the fact that even if as great a pope as John Paul II couldn't save Vatican II, maybe Vatican II can't be saved. Maybe that's not Vatican II's fault. Maybe it's just the way things shook out. There have been councils in the history of the church before that didn't work out. Trent was a tremendous success, but the reason Trent was a success was because the council before it, Lateran V, was a failure. The reason why you had the Council of Trent, and we've been living off the fumes of Trent for centuries, but the reason why Trent happened at all was because there had been a previous council that tried to address the Protestant reformers in the 16th century that was a miserable failure. Sometimes councils succeed, sometimes councils fail. Doesn't mean it was a heretical council or whatever, a radical traditionalist would say. It may just mean that it didn't work out. And I think we have to talk about that more and more. I think that may be at the core of some of the failures of the conservative Catholicism that a guy like me believed in when I was about your age. We have to come to terms with that. That's one thing we have to do. In terms of moving forward, I would say another, you may have heard of Rod Dreher, of a thing called the Benedict option. Yep. Leah Labresco wrote a book about it herself. And I have profoundly mixed feelings about the Benedict option, but I agree with the central core of it, which is that, the church is not doing well, right? We've just talked about that. You and I are agreed. Yep. And Dreher's argument is that what we have to do is focus on having intentional communities where the faith can be passed on, that we can't just rely on the mainstream institutions of our own churches to pass on the faith. And you and I know each other through the local homeschooling movement. That's something we've kind of been doing actually before Dreher slapped a name on it and marketed it as the Benedict option, right? Some of us have been doing that for years and years. And I don't think Dreher would disagree with that. I think he would say, well, yeah, that's actually, efforts like yours is what I'm trying to publicize and draw attention to and say that this is what the church needs to do. And I think
so many dynamic conversations that have to happen, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, which, and this has been great. I think there's one more string I want to try and pull on, kind of condensing some of the things you said. If we're losing the culture war, we have to do something different, and I think what you said about the eggheads was, it kind of resonated, because I think there is, it seems to me like some of the popular Catholic media people, it almost seems like there's a sense in which we have all the good arguments and we just need to optimize them, and then we'll win, and it's just optimizing existing arguments and tactics, and it strikes me as wrong-headed. We have to do something like different.
I live for that. It doesn't work. If that was enough, then same-sex marriage would not be law right now.
Yeah. For sure. And you mentioned a couple things about building community, and that's one way to address it. As far as, something that 20-somethings maybe can take away, the way I tend to think about it is like one thing that's really helped me, for example, which is when I went to college and I realized kind of the cookie cutter arguments that I inherited weren't really cookie cutting. I kind of resorted to my own, I'll figure it out. Like what works, what sticks. Let's just have conversations with friends, and it's kind of Build-A-Bear politics, but just let's see what sticks. And like something that really worked for me, not necessarily in politics, but like when I'm talking about belief in God, something that really stuck with me, and I think resulted in better conversations was, well, instead of trying to optimize Aquinas, and that's how I'm going to convince people that God exists, or instead of having that tactic, my tactic changed to, well, let me talk about my experiences and why I'm religious in the first place, and then let me philosophize about that. So I could talk about my experiences and then say, well, are those good reasons to believe in God? And I would think so. I hope so. But
Well, if you read the New Testament, Saint Paul just kept going back and back. Let me tell you about the time I got knocked off a horse. I was on my way to Damascus.
yeah.
You wouldn't believe it. I mean, I think there's definitely a value in that.
Well,
Or even
the broader point, yeah.
Protestant brethren know that. Sorry, go on.
Well, yeah, just the broader point being that, if we have to do something else, it's not just about optimizing old tactics. It's about like, what is the new thing that we got to do, and the answer that I converged on for, a subset of my conversations with people is, well, let's focus more on experiences and philosophizing at that level, you know, and it's just, argue from experience, really. And that's something that helped me with our conversations about the existence of God. Um, I think what something that you talked about again was the Benedict option and building community. Do you have any more takeaways for maybe 20 somethings about navigating these conversations?
Um, Experience is important. In fairness, experience does only get you so far because, I mean, certainly like within the church, if you're familiar with the liberal dissenters, the people that are always trying to change church teaching to make it more like the spirit of the world, that's what they're always leaning heavy on, is experience. So it's like, it's a double-edged sword. You got to be careful with that.
Well,
But
that was what I was concerned, was if I focus on my experience, well, people might just say, well, that's good for you, but that's your experience. Why should I believe in God? And the same thing is, if you rely too much on experience, is like, that's why the conversation's so dynamic, because I
well,
found something that really stuck, and it helped me have better conversations with people. But it comes with all these asterisks, and that's what makes it a really interesting conversation to have.
the
Sorry.
trick is to thread the needle. You want to be, what you want to show them is that Catholicism is full service, man. We address the whole person. Experience, logic, it all holds together. Like our liberal secular friends, they pretty much, you're going to find that they rely heavily on experience. Even when they offer logic, when you drill down, it's really more sort of feelings, experiential. You don't want to be entirely dismissive of that, but you want to, you don't want to be dismissive of it at all. But you want to raise it to a higher level and say, look, experience matters. Feelings do matter. I mean, I'm sorry, but people who I was with, you addressed this in one of your previous podcasts. I saw that. I was nodding my head in agreement. You can't just be like, well, what you feel doesn't matter because here's the truth and blah, blah, blah. And this has been important in some of the things that have occurred here in our country this summer, ever since the horrible murder of George Floyd. It's not enough to just be like, well, here's the stats that show that more white people die by more unarmed white people die by police than black people. Oh, no. It's a way bigger conversation than that.
Yeah.
That's not to deny the truth of the stat, but there's a whole lot more going on. And what you got to do is be comprehensive and take in the whole person. If you want to move the conversation forward and move it to where there's an end goal, there's an end game, which is heaven, right? I mean, ultimately, we will the good of the person. We will the eternal good of the person. All this temporal stuff is really just sort of a training ground. It's boot camp for something that's going to last much longer.
Yeah. Well, I think we that was great. I think we hit all the deep stuff that we kind of gave a nice overview of the ocean. I think there's a lot more. We could have talked about this for hours, but I think we sailed across the ocean pretty well. So yeah, in the interest of time, I'm sensitive of your time, but hey, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, Stephen, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.